Hello and welcome to ReggiesTake.com, podcast number 23, Space, the Final Frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Reggie. Not really. Today we're going to talk about everything encompassing Star Trek, a little bit of television series, the films, animated series possibly, and whatever else we come up with about Star Trek. Joining me today, James from the True Believers. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are you doing?
All right. Star Trek, probably, I don't know if it'd be the biggest or the second biggest, depending on how you want to look at it with Star Wars, but one of the two major sci-fi franchises out there, especially movie-wise. And of course, Star Trek is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. Star Trek Beyond comes out, which will be its 13th movie, and we decided, or at least I decided, that we'd talk a little Star Trek on this podcast. I don't know if I want to call myself a true aficionado or Star Trek nerd, but I do enjoy the franchise.
Oh, I would say that you are. I would say that you would qualify as a Trekkie.
Okay. I will say this, just to put it out in the record, I do not know everything. Okay. So I try to know as much as I can, but I am not like my father-in-law. My father-in-law, before he passed away several years ago, you could ask him something about Star Trek, and he could lip it off, and I go back and look it up, just to see if he was right, and he was. So
that's funny.
So it was like I didn't even try and argue or even try and outwit him. It was just like, okay, you're cool.
You gotta know when you're beat.
Yeah. Star Trek actually started out in the 60s with the original series, which if you don't know what Star Trek is or seen the original series, then you're living in a cave. It started by Gene Roddenberry, obviously. The original series ran from 1966 to 69 for 79 episodes, and of course it gave us James T. Kirk, Dr. McCoy, Spock. Basically, everything of the original cast from that series is pretty well known, and of course the rebooted movies that started with Abrams, or that Abrams did, went back to that particular set of characters. What's your thought of the original series?
Oh, I love it. Actually, I remember when I was a kid, and I'd watch it every now and then. I gotta say, and I know this might be, I was always more of a Star Wars fan. I'd watch Star Trek here and there, either the original, usually the Next Generation was on, or Voyager. I catch an episode, but I wasn't in-depthly involved in it. And I've seen some of the movies, like I saw Star Trek Part 4 and 2 when I was a kid. But, I definitely wasn't like a huge fan until, I'd hate to say it, the 2009 movie.
Right.
I really liked that movie. I really liked it when it came out. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm going to start watching the old ones and go from the beginning. And I'd always known how important the original show was.
Right.
But watching it, I was like, oh my gosh, it really is one of the best shows ever made. Granted, there are a lot of filler episodes. Like, you'll watch a great episode, and then the next episode is like
suck.
Yeah, it's like, we're on the mobster planet, which that was actually a pretty funny episode, but I was like, I can't believe there's already been a Western planet. There's been a planet that's just like Earth, except only children live there. Then there's a Nazi planet.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, this is kind of getting ridiculous. But the Mobster Planet was the one where I was, all right, guys, like, you got to come up with something a little better than this.
And if you notice, the original series had a lot of, seemed like a time travel episodes. And that's how they always were somehow set in the 60s type Earth setting. Whether they may not have been on Earth, but it was like other planets.
Every planet was just like
similar to Earth, or in some way copying Earth. But that's fine. I mean, it was science fiction in the 60s.
They had to do with what they got. I don't think it was a particularly big budget show.
No, and they had to get creative. And something I saw on the Blu-rays for the Next Generation, and there's some really good new special features on there they did, which if you can afford to go out and buy the box set, go out and do so. When they began Next Generation, they didn't want to do the same thing music-wise that what the original series did. Roddenberry wanted to make sure it was different, so they actually used a live orchestra to score all the music for Next Generation. And I didn't know this, but a lot of the because of the restricted budget that the original series had in the 60s, they would score some new music every year, but then it would get reused constantly.
Yeah.
So you heard a lot of the same music constantly, or kind of whatever, but it was never re-recorded again. It was always some incarnation of something they'd already used, either from the previous season or they recorded earlier in that season.
They'd remix it.
Right. And that's how they did. So they wanted to avoid that in the Next Generation, which was good.
My favorite tune, and it's like you say, the first time it appears is the famous time, but then the first time this theme appears on the show is the one that everyone remembers it, but they reuse it all the time after that. It's the one on the episode Amok Time, where it's the battle between Kirk and Spock. It's that...
Yeah. I just recently watched that off of Netflix. That's actually one of their better episodes.
Pretty good, yeah.
It's one of the better.
Yeah, it is.
And then, of course, to me, the original series has got some really classic episodes. Forgive me, I don't know the names of some of these original episodes, but there's the one where Kirk fights Gorn.
Yeah,
that's considered a classic one.
Also, the one where they go to the alternate universe and Spock has a goatee.
Oh, the mirror universe.
Have you ever seen that episode? It's one of the earliest episodes of South Park where like they open up a portal to another universe and all the kids have goatees.
No, I have not seen.
They're all evil except for Goatee Cartman. He's a good kid, obviously.
I'll have to look that one up. But anyway, Trouble with Tribbles. That's a really good classic episode. Yeah. But DS9 on the 30th anniversary of Star Trek revisited that in Trials and Tribulations. Kind of.
Oh, yeah. What a funny title.
If you haven't seen that, the crew of DS9 ends up in the Defiant, ends up somehow traveling back to the same time the Enterprise is at Deep Space Station K7. And they did a lot of interacting and putting those characters in that same setting. They changed it a little bit, for their purposes, but it's really a good episode. They did it right.
Well, and then there's a really good one. The what is it? City on the Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah,
that's a really good one.
And then also, of course, Space Seed, which gave us Khan in the first season.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that one is pretty good.
Which, if you've seen that one, that's in the first season, and that's before Chekhov was actually there.
Really?
Yes. But then if you watch the Star Trek II Wrath of Khan and Ricardo Montalban's, taking off all his headgear and all this to reveal himself, and he looks at Paul Winfield's character and he's like, I don't know you. And then he turns and looks at Chekhov. He goes, but you, I'd never forget to face.
That's really funny. And he wasn't even in that episode.
He wasn't even on the show at that time. And no one actually, really funny. When they wrote that, I think they didn't realize at the time that he wasn't technically on it. Yeah. And they came up with the excuse, oh, well, he wasn't around the ship at that point in time, but he was somewhere in the bathroom or wherever the hell. Yeah. It's like, yeah, entire
I mean, you can, when you watch a show and you have to pretend like it's real, it's like, well, there's stuff going on that you can't see because like we jump to different scenes.
Right.
So, like, then you realize it's a TV show and who cares?
Yeah.
But, like, that is really funny.
But you were talking about, you didn't really see much of the original show as a kid. And I was like you. My first really thing of sci-fi that I really liked was Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And Star Wars was the big thing. I mean, it had the action, it had the excitement, it had lightsabers, it had Darth Vader. I mean, what's not to like? And where I was living at the time, you could catch reruns of the original series, but it always seemed so dull and boring as a kid. When you're 12, 13 years old watching it, you just like, oh, this is so boring and dull.
And even Next Generation seemed pretty dull when I was a kid. It's like...
But you seem to me, at least in my perception, to really appreciate and understand, especially the original series episodes, you almost have to be an adult and get past a certain point in your life to really understand what they were trying to get at and trying to tell you or talk about in their own way. And of course, Roddenberry used that show to talk about the
social commentary.
Issues of the time.
I mean, well, and obviously the kiss between Kirk and Uhura,
right?
That's the first interracial kiss on television,
right? And
not to mention just the fact that they had a black woman, a Japanese guy, not just Asian, Japanese. I mean, this was 20 years after World War II.
A Russian,
yeah,
supposedly,
and they were equals.
Right.
I mean, they weren't treated like
second-class citizens or looked upon differently.
I mean, nowadays it might not seem like much, but in the 60s, that was a big deal.
And forgive me, I don't know the name of the episode right off the top of my head, but that one episode where you have those guys where half their face is painted black and their face is painted white, and the whole
not subtle, but yeah,
right. The whole issue is there's a certain class of those citizens that have white on the left side and black on the right, and the other part have it flip-flop. They're racial episode type of thing where there was discrimination against the others who were opposite, but they were all still black and white. So it was, they found subtle ways of talking about the issues.
To the Dr. Seuss people who spread their butter upside down, which, like, seriously, those people should be exterminated. They're evil. No, spread it upside down. I don't care.
Yeah, Roddenberry, when he created the original series, was inspired by westerns such as Wagon Train, Horatio Hornblower novels, Gulliver Travelers, and actually they kind of called the original, he described the original series as Wagon Train to the Stars.
That's actually pretty weird because, like, I can see the Gulliver's Travels.
Right.
Wagon Train. Have you ever watched that show? That kind of shocks me a little bit that this show is. I mean, I can kind of see it now that once you think about it.
Right.
That show, my mom, every time that show is on and I'm around my parents, my mom is like, when I was a little kid, and this is how old they are, she's like, when I was a little kid, way back in the old days, the cast from Wagon Train came to our school. They were traveling to different schools to promote their show or whatever. Right. It also reminds me, I will say, Star Trek reminds me a lot of Twilight Zone. That was kind of a thing in the 60s, because so does Gunsmoke. They all have this Twilight Zone-y, like, it's riddled with, or not riddled, but it's full of social commentary, and usually there's like some weird twist ending. And
the original series was actually canceled technically twice. It got canceled after the second season, but a letter writing campaign got NBC to go ahead and renew it for a third season. And of course, after the third season, it was canceled. And the last original episode actually aired on June 3rd of 1969. I think I read where they tried it again, but it didn't. Yeah. It didn't work. But yeah, so it got canceled.
People don't like the third season as much, though, right? It was a little bit.
I think a lot of people
dropped the budget.
Yeah, I think they dropped the budget, and I think a lot of people said that Star Trek, at least the original series, had hit its stride during the second season.
Yeah, it really does. Because I went through them, and season 2 is pretty bomb.
Yeah, there's a lot of good episodes in season 2. Of course, then there was a chance, was it 5 years later or so, they did the Star Trek animated series for 2 seasons, although it's only 22 episodes, so I'm guessing about 11 episodes a season. I think those ran on Saturday morning? I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm guessing that's probably where they would have ran.
Now they're on Netflix, or they were. Netflix giveth and Netflix taketh away.
I know you don't see them in the stores anymore, but I'm pretty sure they do have the animated series on either DVD or Blu-ray. I'm not sure about Blu-ray.
I don't know about Blu-ray, but I know when they had all of those, it was in the same type of box design as other Star Treks.
Surprising enough, the animated series actually won Star Trek its first Emmy in 1975, which when I saw that, I was kind of surprised.
Tried to watch a couple episodes. I bet if I stuck with it, I really would have liked it. It's really interesting. Like, I mean, a show like Star Trek, almost any of these science fiction shows, you can do a lot more with animation,
right?
In some ways,
because you're not limited. You're not limited as where you can go. You can, because with animation, you can pretty much draw where you want to go.
Well, and that's why after like the Star Wars prequels and Lord of the Rings, all these comic book movies, there's more and more CGI, and it's animated CGI. It's the same thing. Like, you can do a lot more with that. I mean, granted, if you do too much, it looks fake, but if you just do a cartoon, it really works out. The big problem, though, is the animation might have actually been really good for its time.
Looking at it now, it's a little...
From the 70s.
I think I may have watched 1 or 2 episodes of that here and there, and I know they went back and revisited a little bit of their Trouble with Tribbles things. I know that there was an episode they dealt with that again.
They loved that episode. They were just like little furry balls.
Right. Speaking of going back to the original series real quick, if you don't own the Blu-ray to the original series, I really encourage, if you really want to pick up the original series and watch the original series, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to really watch them off the Blu-ray sets. Because what they do on the Blu-ray sets, they went back kind of like they did for Next Generation. But with the original series, on the Blu-rays, you can watch the episodes as they originally aired, untouched, nothing altered on them.
Yeah.
If you watch the cleaned up version, remastered versions that they did,
that CGI.
What they did was they didn't change anything of the interior sets or anything like that as far as the characters or the sets themselves. What they did was they went back, when you see the ships flying in space,
shots,
the ship itself, then the cells look more like they did in the movies. They cleaned up all the shots of the ship Enterprise flying around.
CGI.
Yeah. They put in better looking of the planets, the effects of the creatures that were floating out in space that they came across were digitally redone.
You know, I get it when that was new. That might have been cool, but it's Star Trek. We know that this stuff was pretty lame looking. I'd rather just see the map painting.
Yeah, well,
rather than the
I can see why they did the remastered and put it out to Blu-ray. And nowadays, usually if you see the original series on TV somewhere, it's the remastered one. They didn't try to do it to piss anybody off.
No.
or whatever. They just tried to bring up the effects more up to what everyone's used to with Next Generation and the other series.
And there's nothing wrong with that. And the fact that like you have that option,
right?
That's always been my argument with. I know I'm like right now I'm another dork on the internet complaining about Lucas, and I'm not really complaining, but that's always been my argument is a lot of the changes in those Star Wars movies are really good, but it's like
there's also some that he should have left alone. He should have left alone too.
If I want the option of seeing the original on Blu-ray quality, I mean, I know I can see it on a Laserdisc quality compressed to a DVD, which isn't much fun to watch, but I feel like if I want the option of watching the originals on a Blu-ray, I
should be able to.
Yeah.
I know everyone's always like, well, why don't you put out the original versions of those on Blu-ray? And I think we've talked about this before, and Lucas
destroyed them.
Lucas claimed there's no original copies left of the...
I do not.
I don't know if I believe that or not. Of course, the only one who really knows that right now is probably Disney and Lucasfilm. And to me, if there is good, viable copies out there, that's got to be a cash cow waiting just to go off, because...
Lucas is probably waiting to sell those.
Yeah, but anyway, if you really want to watch Star Trek, buy the Blu-ray set, because you have the option of watching it how it originally was, and then what they did.
Or you can do the
updated version. Yeah. So, and I think that was great, because that gave the purists who want to watch it as it originally was, you can still watch it that way, or if you just want to see the cleaned up version, that's still, you got that option too. We'll get to the films here in a little bit, but I figured, they brought back Star Trek to television for the first time in 1987 with the Next Generation, and I think most of today's people, or at least younger generations, probably more familiar with, if they're seeing Star Trek for the first time, was probably the Next Generation
cast.
That
theme song actually came from the first Star Trek movie.
They used the theme song from the movies in Next Generation.
I'm actually not a fan of that theme song. I gotta say, it's like
okay.
It sounds a little too important and boring.
It's okay. I mean, it's recognizable, because now if you hear it, you know what it's to. Kind of like if you hear the beginning of Star Wars or Indiana Jones or Jaws, or it's iconic in the sense you know what it's associated with.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not it's the best piece of music in the world, maybe not. At least it's recognizable.
Well, that one had Patrick Stewart,
Jonathan Frakes, LeVar Burton, Brent Spiner, Will Wheaton.
Yeah, LeVar Burton was on. That's right.
And actually, the only two cast members that were known for anything or had done anything that anyone would know of was LeVar Burton and Will Wheaton.
Yeah.
Because LeVar Burton had done Roots and some other things.
That's right. Yeah.
And Will Wheaton obviously had done Stand By Me. So,
and
maybe a couple other smaller roles when he had gotten that part of Wesley Crusher. But those were only two actors that had done anything previous when they were hired for Next Generation. Anyway, Next Generation, first season is definitely, I think, the weakest of all 7 seasons of that show. I was reading up for doing this podcast. A lot of writers came and went during the first season of Next Generation, because Roddenberry, any of the scripts in the first, at least for the first 15 episodes, kept going back behind all the writers and rewriting all the scripts for the shows, and didn't necessarily improve them. Most said he kind of made them worse than what they were. But so a lot of writers came and went during that first season.
Put him on quality control. They put him on a leash after a while, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, see, after the motion picture, because he had complete control with the Star Trek the motion picture in '79, and because it was so slow, Paramount basically pulled control away from him for the movies. Roddenberry had lost control, so when they did Star Trek 2, Star Trek 3 through Star Trek 6 with the original cast, Roddenberry had nothing to do with.
So what was this Phase 2 thing?
Phase 2 was he was trying to revise the Star Trek, and someone after the Star Wars phenomenon happened in '77, Paramount or CBS, I think it was Paramount, wanted to, because Paramount bought the rights to Star Trek, because it was originally with Desilu Studios.
Yeah, that's right.
And when Desilu sold out, Paramount bought it all up. So Star Trek then fell underneath the Paramount banner, which the films are still with Paramount. The shows are now with CBS. It was an attempt to revive the original Star Trek series back to television, but because certain things didn't work out right, they decided, well, instead of doing another television series, let's do a movie. So that's how the motion picture came about. Yeah, actually with Phase 2, most of the original cast was willing to return, other than Leonard Nimoy. He was not willing to return. He only returned because when they did the movie, he decided, well, I'll return for the movie. And if you watch certain interviews from the disc and other things, he figured, okay, I'll return, do it for the fans, because he figured it was just going to be the one movie, and be done with it. So he figured, okay, I'll return. So that's how he ended up returning anyway for the movies. And we'll get into him leaving and coming back and leaving and whatever.
I know we've done a pretty big show on him when he died, but it's worth re-talking about.
But anyway, Next Generation ran for 7 seasons. It was the first actual television show of anything that was completely syndicated. Made for syndication.
Really?
Yeah. I was reading where they had shopped it around to the networks, NBC, CBS, Fox, ABC, but no one was willing to give them a full season.
Yeah.
Some were like, well, we'll give you a 2-hour movie, and if it does well, we'll give you a partial season. Others were only willing to guarantee them a 13-episode run, and that was it, and nothing guaranteed after that, or even all 13 episodes would run if it didn't succeed. And Paramount was pretty pumped up for their new product, and they wanted to make sure their new show got a full season run in the first season. They went all syndication. I didn't write it all down. It's too much to go into, but so that's how Star Trek ended up being syndicated.
Okay.
And it ran all syndicated shows, and actually by the time the show got to its 7th season, the ratings for Star Trek Next Generation were as equivalent as to a lot of the top 10 shows running on the networks.
Yeah.
So it did well as far as ratings, and actually the series finale, All Good Things Come to an End, for Next Generation was actually number 2 that week. It fell between Home Improvement and Seinfeld.
Really?
The week that it aired, and that was in I think in June of '94, I believe. And Star Trek Next Generation ran for 176 episodes. And actually, Next Generation set a record for itself in a certain sense when it hit season 4, because then it became the first Star Trek show to actually go longer than 3 seasons.
That's true.
I really think Next Generation, though, hit a stride in season 3. It's when it started separating itself from the original series. Came into its own. And there are a lot of good episodes in Next Generation. I mean, the Borg episodes, the episodes with Q.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the Klingon episodes they dealt with Worf were really pretty good. But like even with the original series, there's some episodes that just suck beyond belief with Next Generation.
That's one of the nice things about shorter seasons now is that even if they're not made on a streaming network, they're still made kind of with streaming in mind now. And that works great because they're shorter seasons, so you cut out all the crap. Like, we're probably never going to see... I mean, the sitcoms on CBS, like Big Bang Theory, are still kind of old-fashioned, but kind of the more like...
Modern Family type of comedy shows you're seeing. You know, they're not shot in front of an audience. They're all shot out on location, it seems like.
Well, and they're...
you don't find too many...
You're not going to see clip shows on those ever.
No. Same way with Big Bang Theory. You've never seen the clip show with Big Bang Theory.
Really? They didn't do one on there?
No, they haven't.
Oh, maybe clip shows are dead.
I think clip shows are, looked at anymore as a cheap way of
they always
trying to fill an episode. I think it's frowned upon more by the audience than what it used to be.
Well,
I think especially now, since you do have access to
home
seasons, media, like, you know, a season ends in May, and by the following September, you can buy that previous season, you know, at Best Buy or Walmart or whatever the hell you want to, or whatever format you like it on. And, or buy it on iTunes.
Probably back in the 80s and even in there.
It was a way to quickly catch you up a little bit or see something you...
Even in the 90s, though, like I remember even when Simpsons would do a clip, and they've only done a couple, but I remember even like their first clip show is called It Had to Happen, a Simpsons clip show. Like even starting in the 90s is when people started, and I think because even if they weren't doing full seasons, they used to do VHSs of like the top episodes or whatever, or they weren't top episodes. They were usually just a random mix of episodes on VHS, but you could go and rent those. And there was so much syndication back starting in the 90s that it's like, you're going to catch this on rerun. Like you don't really need...
I've been on this Married with Children kick on DVD recently. And I didn't...
Wait a minute. Whoa,
I know.
You own the DVD of Married with Children?
I love that show.
Okay, all right.
I love that show. It's rude, crude, it's wrong, but I love it. And I'm sorry, but when I see Ed O'Neill on Modern Family, I do not see him as his character. Only thing I can think of is Al Bundy. I'm sorry. You know, he may be having success with Modern Family, and that's great for him, but all I see is Al Bundy, and that's all he'll ever be to me is Al Bundy.
Remember how, like, he wouldn't have sex with pig?
Well, you know,
and I still don't totally get the joke. Like,
no,
is it just like, is he just grossed out by her? Now? Like,
well, I know we're way off topic here, but for as much as he quote hated his wife, his kids, his life, his home life, his neighbors, and when it came right down to it, he would defend his family vehemently. So, but
that was a really stupid show.
But it's funny. I'm sorry, it was funny.
No, it's funny.
But anyway, what I was getting at was I was watching the 9th season the other night, and I didn't realize it, but after their 200th episode had had aired, the following week they did a clip show.
Oh, yeah.
To look back over the previous 200 episodes. So even in the mid-90s, they were still doing, quote, clip shows for certain things.
Yeah, but that took them 200 episodes.
So
they were phasing it out.
Well, it ended up running for another 2 seasons after that season.
No, I mean, they were phasing the clip
shows out. Yeah.
Like, did you ever see the Clerks animated show? Like, I think it only lasted for like 5 episodes. There's not very many. It's really funny because the second episode is a clip show. So they're like stuck in the back room and they're like, remember that time? And they just keep showing clips of the first episode, which is really fun.
Wow. But but anyway, that was my point with Meredith's Children. You know, Star Trek would go on, beginning with Next Generation, it would go on a run with 18 years straight. People were able to see new episodes of a Star Trek show.
Yeah. Wow, that's actually really interesting.
18 years. From 1987 through 2005, every year there was you could watch new episodes of Star Trek and some form of variation. In middle of season 6 of Next Generation, Paramount debuted Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which ran from 93 to 99, had 176 episodes. It was set on...
Wow, so that was going on when Next Generation was still on.
Right. Paramount really could have probably taken Next Generation to an 8th and 9th season because it was still really popular, but Paramount had wanted to move the Next Generation cast to movies, and they really wanted the people on TV to really more focus on Deep Space Nine than they did Next Generation. So that's the reason why...
Deep Space Nine lasted that long.
7 seasons.
Yeah.
Deep Space Nine, I like Deep Space Nine. I found it different. And I enjoyed it. It was all set on a space station. Most of the action had to come through Deep Space Nine instead of everyone going out looking for it. Yeah. It was a different type of show. I really enjoyed that show, personally. I know there are some that say, well, I liked Voyager better than I did Deep Space Nine because it was more like Next Generation and the original series. But I was actually more of a fan of Deep Space Nine than I was Voyager. I mean, I like Voyager. I've seen most of the episodes of Voyager, and I watched Voyager because Voyager and Deep Space Nine overlapped there for several years.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
Because in the middle of the 4th season of Deep Space Nine, Voyager came on in 1995 and ran through 2001 for 172 episodes. Voyager has the distinction, though, of having the first, quote, female
it has less
captain.
Episodes and by 4 than Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, that's because 4 of their episodes actually ran as, quote, when it aired as 2-hour episodes.
Oh, I see.
Now, if you take those and divide them up, like they would for syndication, you add those 4 episodes back in, then it'd be about the same as what DS9 was, as far as that goes. It depends on how it is you want to look at it, I guess. Voyager had the distinction, though, of having the first female captain in a starring role with Kate Mulgrew, with Janeway. You know, that show wasn't bad. It was all right. I mean, you got a lot of Borg in that show, too, because for where it was set.
I'd watch it when I was on at night. Like, I wasn't a big fan. It was kind of more the same of Next Generation.
But they set it in the Delta Quadrant instead of the Alpha Quadrant where Next Generation was set at. There's some good episodes with Voyager. The Year of Hell, 2-part episode, that's a really good episode. There are some good episodes. Hell, even Q makes 2 or 3 appearances on that show as well. One of the first appearances with Q, I think called Death Wish in Voyager, is a really good episode, and it deals with another Q that Voyager runs into and finds who wants to commit suicide. And so there's this whole big to-do about whether or not the guy has the right to commit suicide.
It was on UPN.
Yes, it debuted on UPN, but it also, at the same time it was on UPN, it was also put out to syndication as well.
Does UPN exist in any form at all anymore?
No, I think UPN kind of evolved into the CW.
No, that was WB.
Okay, yeah. It kind of more or less into My TV, I think it is. I think it morphed into the My TV type of thing. I know the WB and UPN both morphed into something else.
Yeah.
But I know when Voyager debuted on UPN, it was also put out to syndication as well at the same time. And in order for it to be seen nationwide, they had to do that. Enterprise was also on UPN.
Man, these really did start right next.
Right after. When Voyager ended in 2001, Star Trek on TV, I think, was kind of starting, its popularity was starting to wane. It was on a decline. Not like when they started up Deep Space Nine and you still having a high from Next Generation and people were like, ooh, give me more.
Yeah.
And even when Voyager started, I think people were excited to see a new show come on as well. But by the time Voyager ended, I think people were starting to get tired of seeing Star Trek.
Yeah.
I always thought what they should have done, instead of starting Enterprise the following fall after Voyager ended, was they should have waited 2 or 3 years before they started up another show.
No.
Give people a chance to say, we haven't seen any new Star Trek in a while. Where is it? But no, they started right back. They set Enterprise like 100 years before the first show, the original series.
No.
Kind of had problems with some continuity issues because they kind of contradicted some things, which pissed off the hardcore fans. Now, if you weren't a hardcore fan, you probably never picked up on it, nor you cared. And my problem with Enterprise, it wasn't that it wasn't necessarily a bad show. It wasn't the greatest Star Trek show put out there, but I always felt it suffered too much from too many 2 and 3 and even 4-part episodes.
Yeah.
To where if you missed an episode 1 week and you didn't have a DVR or recorded it that week, and then you picked up on it the following week, well, then you were already behind. It's like, well, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, it suffered in that regard, which instead of having a lot of one-and-done type of episodes, which is what you got with Next Generation, except for the occasional 2-part episodes or the cliffhangers, which, going back to Next Generation, if you look, the end of Season 3, The Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2, where Picard gets captured by the Borg, the end of that episode, you have Riker, because Picard's now Locutus saying, you will be assimilated, da-da-da, number 1, and Riker, they do this whole kind of Michael Bay circle thing around Riker, and with this dramatic music going on playing, and then all you hear is Mr. Worf, fire, and then they go to black, to be continued, which is considered one of the probably the top 5 cliffhangers of all time on TV. To have that happen with a Star Trek episode and be considered that is really cool still, because it still kind of holds up. So to have that happen, Star Trek did have some good episodes, and that's my problem with Enterprise is it just didn't have enough one-and-dones in my book.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was the 2nd season or the 3rd season of Enterprise, but pretty much they dealt with the Xindi War for like an entire year. So basically from the first episode all the way through to the end of the season was basically this one long continuous storyline, and which I thought was kind of ridiculous because, you could lose track of where you're going with it. I think it hurt Enterprise to where I think Deep Space Nine did it better because like the last 3 years of Deep Space Nine, they had the Dominion War, but you still got a lot of, quote, self-contained episodes. They would make mention of the Dominion War in Deep Space Nine and talk about it a little bit here and there that it was going on. That wasn't necessarily the main point of every episode. Sometimes they would deal with it and come back to it several episodes later or maybe even 5 or 6 episodes later, but it was never the focal point of an entire season.
No.
It became more of a focal point like the last 10 episodes of the series when it was trying to, work its way off and right to a finale, which was fine. You needed to do that at that point. But, I think Enterprise suffered in that respect. I don't know. There's some good episodes with Enterprise, but not as many as some of the other series. And, of course, Enterprise had Scott Bakula. And I don't know if that hurt the show as well because, Scott Bakula, you're thinking, oh, hey, the Quantum Leap guy.
Yeah.
Because the first season I watched Enterprise, I was always waiting. You know how a Quantum Leap would always start out at the beginning of the show or at the very end, and he'd jump into someone else's body and whatever, and then you'd hear that famous line of, oh boy, and then it'd go to the starting or whatever. I was always waiting for that to happen for a small joke, and they never did it. So did you ever watch Enterprise, though?
Not really. I skipped that one. I don't think I've ever seen an episode.
Yeah, there are some good episodes with it. I think they could have done without that show in a certain sense. Now, you were talking about before the podcast, Star Trek has been made reference in a lot of other television shows throughout the years. Mm-hmm. And you were showing me one clip from The Simpsons.
Clip from The Simpsons. That is so funny.
Yeah, why don't you talk about that?
What it was, I don't think it was any other voices. I think it was Harry Shearer and all of them. They're watching a preview for the next Star Trek, which is Star Trek 12. This is an early, maybe season 4 episode. Early 90s.
Early
like
90s?
94, 95 maybe, probably 94. It comes in with Kirk's monologue and he's, Stardate, blah, blah, blah. And he's going on about the air conditioner runs too cold. I complain, but no one listens. And he's like super old. And it shows like Uhura and she's really old. Then it's got George Takei, Sulu. And he's like, Captain. He's on a walker.
Well, when you showed me the clip, what was funny is when they cut too close
is when they
Scotty, and he's all big and round.
The best part about that is it's like a tight shot of his face, and he's like, Captain, I can't reach the controls. And then it backs up, and he's huge, and he's so fat he can't even like move his arms, which is really funny because like if you've ever seen the movies, like 20 years later, Scotty got freaking huge in those movies. It's just really funny. The Futurama episode is famous. That it's got all the actors except for, obviously, DeForest Kelley, who is dead at that point.
But they were just all heads, though, in Futurama, right?
Well, hold on. Well, they also didn't have Scotty.
Well, I know the last few years...
James Doohan.
Well, the last several years of his life, he suffered from Alzheimer's.
Yeah, and he couldn't act. So instead, they had a red shirt stand-in named Welshie, who gets killed right away. But yeah, they're all heads. The concept of Futurama is whenever they have celebrities. At first I thought it was really stupid, but it grew on me after a while. The celebrity guest spots are just like cloned heads of the celebrities, basically. Like, so all the Star Trek characters, they've all gone missing except for Spock, which is weird because it's like, can't you just clone more heads? Like, I don't see what the big deal is.
Yeah.
But Spock goes with the Futurama crew to search for the rest of the crew. It's not actually Spock. So it's Leonard Nimoy. They go to this planet, which is based on an old episode of Star Trek, where on this planet, which is a parody of an old episode of Star Trek, but they have all these set designs from the old things, and there's this gaseous cloud that's recreated all of their bodies. And he's basically like making them recreate new episodes of Star Trek is what he's forcing them to do. What's funny is that it parodies an old episode of Star Trek where there's a gaseous cloud that's making the Star Trek characters, it might have even been the Gorn episode, but he's making the Star Trek characters do all these things, and then you see this other gaseous cloud take him away, and it's like, oh, I guess he was a child. A very powerful being was a child all along. And Fry's like, my God, he was a child all along. And the mother cloud goes, child? He's 38 years old. It's really funny. And then at the end, there's a character named Kif, who's this green-skinned little lizard character. At the end of the episode, they play the Star Trek, instead of just the regular credits, they play the Star Trek music and then screenshots of the show, just like the old Star Trek show. And at the very end, there's this picture of Kif that looks just like that weird alien at the end with the Desilu logo. And it's really funny. And then, of course, there's the South Park episode where the kids find a mirror universe, and the big difference is all the kids have goatees, just like Spock did.
I think Star Trek works best, really, as far as overall storytelling on a consistent basis, I think works best on television.
I think so, too. Speaking of, before we get into that real quick, just going into Desilu with the original Star Trek, obviously Desilu was the company started by Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball. Let's see, Lucy was really sold by Roddenberry. She thought it was going to be something different. I guess when it was originally sent to her, she thought she wasn't like a science fiction fan. She was a comedy fan, obviously, but she just knew that the show was going to be big. So she really made sure she wanted that show when she got that script, because she knew that was going to be a really popular show. If you ever read about her involvement, and that's all her involvement was basically her greenlighting the show for the company, but greenlighting the script. But it's actually pretty interesting. She really thought that that show would be a big hit.
The original series actually, I think, grew in popularity after the show was done. It grew in more in popularity and in kind of a cult status and syndication when it was ran on a daily basis in the afternoons and that kind of stuff. And kids started watching it who may not have been around at the time. And I think it grew on popularity there. And I don't know what Lucas's inspiration was for his Star Wars, but I think that was more or less the B type movies from
a lot of them were the Flash Gordon movies
and that kind of stuff.
And, but those serials. There were a bunch of different serials, and of course, a little bit of inspiration comes from the Akira Kurosawa movies. If you ever see The Hidden Fortress, that was the movie directed by Akira Kurosawa that everyone says Star Wars is based on. It's not really based on it. He does borrow some of the style as far as editing and shooting. You do see that. And all those Star Wars wipes, that are so famous, that came from those Japanese movies. Stuff like that. It's not a direct plot. The plots are very different.
Right.
But, I mean, it's pretty interesting to watch. And those are really good movies.
Now, obviously, Star Wars had an influence with Star Trek going to the feature films, because they were going to do the Phase 2, and then popular Star Wars and certain things with the Phase 2 didn't really work out. So they moved on to decided to do a Star Trek what we know as now as the motion picture. And the motion picture is really a very slow, drawn out, no excitement type of movie. And it may have worked as an episode on TV back in the 60s, or maybe even with the Next Generation as far as an episode. But as far as a movie, I'm sorry, I can't stay awake for that entire movie.
Well, it kind of was an episode.
So really,
it's based on one.
It's like, here's the thing. There's a book out that's been published here recently talking about the first 50 years of the franchise. A novelist who's actually done some other books over the last 25 years or whatever it is. They were going through stuff Roddenberry had, and one of the original ideas Roddenberry had for the motion picture, thank God that didn't happen, actually had, of course we know that this entity in the motion picture, is looking for its creator, okay, yes. Which we find out, which is actually a NASA probe from back in the 20th century named Voyager, which everyone says it's V'ger.
Or the Futurama version, Vagini.
One of the original things in there that Roddenberry had, there's this quote from this author on here. It says, Roddenberry's original script, it was disjointed. Scenes didn't work together, didn't build toward anything meaningful. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy didn't seem anything like themselves. There was some mildly erotic midlife crisis stuff in there that didn't serve any real purpose. In the this is where you're really going to have fun with here. In the climatic scene, Kirk had a fist fight with an alien who had assumed the image of, hold on to your horses, Jesus Christ.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So Kirk was slugging it out on the bridge
beating up Jesus.
With Jesus.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Kind of do that with 5, don't they?
Also goes on, which I'm not going to read. Shatner seemed more enthusiastic about that particular storyline than anybody else, which we'll get into a little bit later. But Shatner directed Star Trek V, which is actually Spock's half brother looking for, quote, God at the center of the universe. I think he kind of borrowed some of that, what didn't get used for the motion picture, but thank God they did not do that, because really that's kind of almost blasphemy and would have
back
been
in the 70s
would have seemed offensive to a lot of people.
Yeah. Like you could probably get away with that now, but back in the 70s, like people were a lot more religious back then. Like, I mean, look at The Exorcist, like what an uproar that movie made.
Surprisingly enough, though, as slow as the motion picture is, it still did decent numbers at the box office. Now,
it was riding off the coattails of Star Wars.
It didn't do as well as the Paramount had hoped. It still did fairly decent, and I got a list here of what the films did domestic. Now, there's a mistake I realized while talking. If you look, Star Trek, the motion picture, and Wrath of Khan have the same numbers.
I was about to say, what a coincidence.
Actually, that's not true. Actually, Star Trek, the motion picture, domestically in theaters did $82 million. The Wrath of Khan, that's the one that has the wrong number. It only did domestically $78 million. Yeah. But after the motion picture, which Roddenberry had control over with Paramount, in a certain sense, basically took control of the films away from Roddenberry. I did not know this, but The Wrath of Khan was made on a budget of only $38 million.
Yeah, that's right.
It's also the cheapest made Star Trek movie out there.
Yeah, and you can tell, if you watch that movie, you can tell that they barely have the air conditioner on. With the sound system, they probably didn't want it running too loud. They are sweating bullets the whole damn movie.
What they did they shot that movie all in the same set. The bridge for the Enterprise and the bridge, Khan took over, which eludes me right off the top of my head. They filmed everything of the Enterprise stuff, and then when they filmed all of Khan's bridge scenes, they completely redressed that set.
Yeah.
And then they used that set. So both sets got destroyed here and there, one worse than the other.
That movie's on a shoestring budget.
But it was also
tell. And when you compare to the motion picture still looks pretty darn good for today. It looks better than Star Wars. At least the first Star Wars.
At least the original versions.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, Wrath of Khan is just one of those movies, and
it's considered one of the best in the franchise.
Oh, it's considered the best.
Yeah.
It's one of those examples of
do more with less.
Yeah.
And voila, success.
Yeah. I'd hate to put Deadpool in the same category, but it is.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that was a low budget movie
a low budget superhero movie. Instead of spending $200 million like a lot of them are now, or $400 million if you're Batman versus Superman. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, granted, like if the movie's really good, a big budget's okay. Like Civil War was really
big
good.
Budget, and I think it all depends on the plot and the storyline and a lot of things. Yeah, I mean, we've now had 12 Star Trek movies, with the 13th one out this year, Star Trek Beyond, which is the third movie with the rebooted franchise. Paramount and CBS finally gave a name to that timeline now. It's always been kind of jokingly referred to as the Abrams universe.
Yeah.
Everything that we were used to with the original series, Next Generation, all that is considered now the Prime universe.
Okay.
The rebooted movie started with Abrams is now called the Kelvin timeline. Basically named after the ship that we see at the beginning of the movie that has Kirk's father on it that gets killed, that runs into the Marauder there, the Romulans and everything. So they've given that now official name. It's now officially called the Kelvin timeline instead of the Abrams universe, which is fine. I'm cool with that.
It needed one.
But as far as the movies go, before I get too far here, there is a whole wide range of money being made by all these films. Highest grossing domestic film for any of the Star Trek movies currently out through Into Darkness is the 2009 Star Trek with $257 million, and the lowest
Nemesis
is Nemesis at $43 million.
And that is, by the way, that's less than the Two Towers made in its opening weekend.
Yeah,
that's less. Two Towers made about 60.
Now, if you add in the worldwide totals for Nemesis, I believe Nemesis is actually over. I think Nemesis goes over the $100 million mark.
I hope that's a good movie. I hope that's good.
Nemesis, there's some good things about Nemesis, and there's also some things that don't work with Nemesis. And as we were talking with, Nemesis came out on December 13th of 2002.
Yeah.
5 days before Lord of the Rings Two Towers. And as I was telling you before we started this podcast, that when I was in line with my father-in-law buying tickets to go see Nemesis, because my father-in-law was a big Star Trek fan, everyone else around us was buying tickets 5 days out for Lord of the Rings Two Towers.
Yeah.
And I really think, regardless of Nemesis plot or script problems, it was overshadowed by the Lord of the Rings movies, period. And I think if you released that movie a month earlier or even 2 months later, it may not have done Star Trek 2 numbers or been received critically as Star Trek, but I think it would have done a lot better than $43 million in its entire domestic run. I just think Nemesis suffered from a little bit of bad timing in my book. Now, some may say, well, it got what it deserved because it sucked. If it hadn't sucked, it would have done it better. But then again, everyone was all hyped up for Lord of the Rings. So I just think it suffered from bad timing. There's some good movies in here. And of course, there's always been that whole theory of even number Star Treks do better than the odd number Star Treks. Star Trek 2, Wrath of Khan, great movie. Star Trek 3, Search for Spock. I think of all the odd number movies, it's probably the best of the odd number movies out there. Star Trek 4. Actually, Star Trek 4 is actually the highest grossing of the original 6 movies, and it has no bad guy.
Yeah, that's a weird movie.
Yeah, but
that's a really weird movie.
But it hit $109 million, and that's the only movie of the original cast that actually went over $100 million in the theater.
That movie's more just like a fun, feel-good movie.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Nothing wrong with that.
And it's kind of the conclusion of, quote, what they kind of consider the Star Trek trilogy, because Star Trek 2, 3, and 4 are really all linked together.
I don't think 3 is a terrible movie.
No, 3, of all the odd number Star Treks, 3 is probably the best of the odd number, at least of the original series.
Yeah, okay. I was about to say, they're
Star
Trek 9 is pretty good.
And of course, the worst of the original series with the original cast gotta be Final Frontier.
I would say that's the worst of all of them.
Yeah.
That is just the worst Star Trek movie. It's a terrible movie. We were joking about it. I love the very beginning of the movie where you've got old, fat William Shatner scaling a mountain. It's like, shut up.
Yeah.
Give me a break.
Well, and the humor with that, they show Dr. McCoy standing there, with binoculars watching Kirk climb the mountain. Oh, come with us on shore leave. We'll have a great time. It's just like, and then Kirk falls. Spock flies down with his jet boots he's wearing, catches
I actually kind of like those boots. That was kind of fun.
Right. But catches Shatner like a foot off the ground, hanging upside down, and they show this upside down shot of him seeing McCoy running towards them. Shatner goes, "Hey, Bones, mind if we drop in?" It's like, really?
God, that's bad. That's terrible.
Terrible movie.
I think 6 is really good. It's actually a pretty good movie.
I think if you're going to have a swan song for the original cast, Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country was really a very fitting end for the original cast as far as the entire cast together. We did get 3 of the members of the original cast appear in Star Trek Generations at the beginning, but as far as an overall goodbye movie for the entire cast, I think it was really very well done.
I always forget that Generations is the first Next Generation, although it makes sense.
Right.
And that one has Kirk in it. He goes to the
Scotty,
future.
and Chekhov at the beginning of it at the launching of the Enterprise B ceremony, and they have that whole issue. Generations, I think, suffers from critically because technically, if you want to think about it, depending on how you want to look at it, Kirk dies twice. Technically, Kirk only dies once, although they imply he dies the first time on the Enterprise B. But we were talking about before the podcast that if you really watch Generations, because the bad guy in that movie, Soren, is trying to get this energy ribbon to come to him so he can get into this place called the Nexus, which is basically you never age and you can pretty much do what you want and create your own kind of envision of life or whatever it is. When Soren finally gets to the Nexus, him and Picard go, and the planet gets destroyed that the Enterprise D has crashed on. Which, that's one thing I hate about the Star Trek films. It seems like about every third to fourth movie, they have to destroy an Enterprise ship.
I know.
Which is becoming really old because they destroy another one, it looks like, in Beyond. And it's like, come on, stop it. It seems to be their whole thing. So the planet gets destroyed. Picard and Soren are in the Nexus. Well, Picard ends up meeting Kirk, which is in the Nexus because of what happened on Enterprise B. Picard talks Kirk into coming out of the Nexus with him to stop Soren on Viridian 3. Well, my whole thing, if you really want to pay attention to that movie, is Picard and Kirk come out of the Nexus, but Soren, who went in, never really does.
Yeah.
So technically, Soren, even though Picard and Kirk are able to kill Soren, but the original Soren is still in the Nexus. So to me, you never really killed off your bad guy in a certain sense.
Yeah.
So there's a flaw with that movie. And I can see why they killed off Kirk in Generations, because then if Generations didn't do so hot, or maybe even First Contact afterwards didn't do so hot and it wasn't well received, you'd have a lot of people clamoring, well, just bring back the original cast or bring back Kirk, put Kirk in another Next Generation movie. And I think Paramount was looking, we don't want to have that issue of fans going, well, just bring Kirk back, So I can see why they killed him off. You don't want to have every time a movie doesn't do so hot of, bring back Kirk. Do you want to see a character like that killed off? Not really. You'd like to see the most iconic character in the Star Trek franchise live. It's funny, there's a special feature on one of the Blu-rays, and they're talking about the writers who wrote the movie, the two writers who wrote the movie for Generations, also were tasked to write the 2-hour finale for the Next Generation television show, All Good Things. They spent a year working on the Generation script. They got handed saying, hey, we need you guys to write the finale. They wrote the All Good Things in like 2 weeks' time. And they didn't really spend a lot of time working on the finale. And in retrospect, they said, really, the better script was All Good Things for the finale of Generations, and the Generations movie itself pretty much sucked. And they spent more time on that. You could almost really put the Generation script as the final finale of of Next Generation and flip-flopped it and put, All Good Things as the movie, and it might have done better. But, or better well received. Either way, it's kind of funny to listen to that, and it's like, I always find that kind of hilarious. You got any favorite movies of them? All these movies you get your good movies, you get your bad movies. First Contact is definitely the best of the Next Generation cast,
I would say so
with
too.
the Borg, they kind of revisit, and that's really good.
I've never seen Insurrection.
Insurrection is like a 2-part episode of Next Generation itself with a bigger budget, and if it would have been an actual airing of an episode, that probably would have been considered one of the better episodes of the series.
But it's just not movie material.
They wanted to go kind of to a slower, not quite so big action budget like they did with First Contact.
Yeah.
First Contact was a lot of fast-paced action, and they wanted to kind of slow things down. I mean, it's okay. It's definitely not the worst movie in the bunch.
I mean, that's really what TV's for, is to slow the action down.
Any favorite movies that you've got? I know you said
Wrath of Khan is the best.
Oh, yeah.
I like Star Trek 6 and 4 a lot. Star Trek 4 is kind of a weird one, but I do like that movie a lot, and I definitely see why that's so popular. I like First Contact, and I like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek a lot.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the movies
really like that movie. Into Darkness, I didn't like as much. I thought was pretty good for the first half. I hate the ending. I don't like that they redid the Spock thing. And also, there is a big flaw with that. You know how, like, Spock has to go find Khan's blood.
Right.
So he does all that work. If you watch the movie, though, they still have all Khan's family like cryogenically frozen in their ship. It's like, why didn't he just like use one of them? I mean, it makes no sense.
I don't know.
It's like this really bad plot hole.
Yeah, what movie doesn't have a plot hole?
That one's pretty bad, though. Like, that's a pretty bad plot hole.
And I've said this before. Some people say, well, they just ripped off Wrath of Khan. Yeah, they borrowed a few things from Wrath of Khan that they could have done without, but I really don't see it as a complete ripoff of Wrath of Khan.
Well, it's not a ripoff. It's an homage. Like, that's the difference. The problem is, I really didn't want an homage. I wanted a new movie.
And I really thought going with Khan for the second movie was a cheap and easy way out.
Yeah.
I really think they could have avoided Khan personally completely.
You know what's funny, though, is Abrams did the exact same thing with Star Wars, because that's all one big homage to the first one.
Yeah, to the New Hope, yeah. If you look at the adjusted ticket price inflation of the movies, the 2009 Star Trek still comes out on top, as it does domestically. And then you got the motion picture as second. And Nemesis still comes out in
think
last.
About, like, 79, 82 million. That's a lot of money in 79.
Considering ticket prices were probably a hell of a lot lower and probably didn't open as in many theaters as 2009 one did.
And I want to say I do like Into Darkness. It's a good movie. I just didn't like it as much as the first one.
Yeah.
And the first one has its problems too.
Right.
Like Abrams has a problem with the plot holes. In the first one, there's the whole black hole thing. It's okay, so according to this, the black holes take you through time.
But at the end, the same black hole.
But at the end, it just kills them.
It destroys
just like what a real black hole would do. It also destroyed all those planets, but for some reason, the one at the beginning sends them back in time, and it's like, why? And then, of course, there's the big thing where they kick Kirk off into that pod.
Right.
He lands on the planet that Spock is living on, which, okay, fine.
Not
only does he land on that planet, but he lands, like, literally within 2 miles of Spock on an entire planet. Man, there are Deus Ex Machinas, and there are Deus Ex Machinas, and holy cow, guys.
Now, I have my ranking of what I think is the best Star Trek film to the worst Star Trek film. I have in my rankings as number 12, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which I don't think too many people would have an argument with.
I agree with you there.
I have number 11, Star Trek The Motion Picture.
That one's pretty bad.
Yeah.
That's the first one.
Right. I have Star Trek Nemesis. Now, I like Nemesis, but in the same sense, I have to put it number 10 because to put it any higher would be almost ludicrous. Then I have Star Trek Generations.
I don't like Generations either.
Now, I have Generations above Nemesis just because it's got Kirk. But you see a little bit of the original cast and Kirk and Picard meeting. It put it above Nemesis in my book. Then I've got Insurrection. Insurrection's, it's a slow-moving one. It's more like a television episode, but there's nothing wrong with it.
That's the only one I've never seen, actually. And who knows, I might have actually seen it
and just don't remember it. But then I've got Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Now, I originally had this one spot lower, and then I changed my mind. You know, Search for Spock is okay. Of all the odd movies, at least in the original 6 movies, it's probably the best of the odd movies.
The thing about Search for Spock, which, by the way, was directed by Leonard Nimoy. It's actually, and it is a very well directed movie. The problem with it, and it's kind of an inevitable problem, is with Star Trek 2, like, killing off Spock was like this grand finale. Like, it was beautiful, it was wonderful. And then, like, all of a sudden they realize, oh, people want to watch more movies, let's bring Spock back.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah, I know.
Here's the thing, though. The director for Star Trek 2, and also who directed Star Trek 6, and for the life of me, I am drawing a blank. Nicholas Meyer. You know, at the end, after they shoot Spock's body out in the torpedo tube, you know, whatever, and they
bury him at space.
You know, they show it flying out. Originally, he had no intention of showing Spock's body on the planet Genesis, the torpedo tube. That was put in by Paramount. Paramount wanted that in there, showing that, you know, Spock's casket, so to speak, landed on the Genesis planet.
Really?
That was not in the original intention of Nicholas Meyer.
Really? So they
doing
planted
that,
the seeds in the fans' minds.
By doing that, they gave them the option in case Leonard Nimoy ever wanted to come back. They had a way of doing so.
So what they did is they actually planted the seeds into the fans' minds, and the fans wanted it back. So Leonard Nimoy,
he did Star Trek 2, but he really wanted this to be his last movie.
Yeah, that's
so
why killed him.
They killed him off. Now, whether or not his intention was he wanted to be killed off or whatever. So when he decided he wanted to come back, and it's
a powerful death scene,
right? Oh yeah,
like it's not like, I'd hate to like bash Generations more. It's not like
if you want to talk about death scenes in Star Trek, I mean that right there in Star Trek 2 as good as you're going to get.
Yeah.
And,
well, like for just about any movie. I mean, it's powerful.
Spock and Kirk can't touch each other. They can only talk. And because they always make reference about the Kobayashi Maru, the no-win scenario. And Spock's like, well, how do you like my solution? You know, it's kind of was his Kobayashi Maru. And he saved the entire ship by sacrificing himself. Search for Spock kind of came about simply because, for what they put in at the end of Star Trek II, which Nicholas Meyer didn't really want in the first place. You can find interviews where he's talked about that. And then when Leonard Nimoy decided, I want to come back and do more Star Trek, and then he's like, I would like to direct. I'll come back, but I want to direct. And it took a little convincing on his part to get Paramount to let him direct. Yeah. But then after he did such a good job in Star Trek 3, he came back and did Star Trek 4, which is really considered really right out there with Star Trek 2 as far as quality.
Well, like Star Trek 3, the big problem with the movie is inevitably going to be flawed because...
Well, you're following the success of Wrath of Khan, and no matter what movie was going to follow it, it was never going to be
the problem with it, though, is like the idea is you're bringing back the character that died such an heroic and tragic death, and just close your eyes and get through this, and then after this we don't have to think about it anymore.
Right.
But to Leonard Nimoy's credit, it was a well-directed movie. And it's just, there's really no way around that.
Yeah. I have, at number 6, I have Star Trek Into Darkness.
I actually, mostly agree with this list so far. I mean,
and now I had originally Star Trek 3 and Into Darkness flip-flopped, and after thinking about it for a while,
I think Into Darkness is better.
I changed it. Now some may disagree. I don't really care. This is my opinion only. At number 5, I've got Abrams' 2009 Star Trek. I think as far as a reincarnation or reimagining or trying to reboot the franchise, this movie was really good. I think the cast they have assembled to play those characters, they haven't tried to copy what the original cast did, but I think they've done a good job of trying to respect what the original cast did do. I think the best one so far has been Zachary Quinto as Spock. I really think he's
really good, although he's my second favorite.
Who's your first?
My favorite is Carl Urban.
Oh, McCoy?
As McCoy, yeah. Those two are the best ones.
And I really hope Carl Urban's got a little bit more meatier part with McCoy
I know,
and
beyond.
That
actually, I didn't even think to mention this. That is actually one of my biggest problems with Into Darkness is he has like 3 lines, and it's like, he's one of the 3 main characters in the show.
It's more or less a lot of his lines are more or less
like comedy lines.
Like
comic relief.
Right. It's not till really the end of the movie that he really has any sort of meat to the movie, but even then it's a small part.
Yeah, Into Darkness really isn't.
Well, it's okay.
It's okay. I'm not a big fan.
It's kind of middle of the road, really.
Yeah, it really is.
So then at number 4, I have Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country. That's the final movie with the original cast. I like that because, you get Kirk dealing with the Klingons, which is something I think the newer movies have not dealt with yet, and I was really hoping Beyond would have the bad guys as Klingons, because so far we have not dealt with Kirk, because Kirk in the original series always hated the Klingons.
Yeah.
He hated the Klingons, and the Klingons hated Kirk.
Yeah.
And so far they have not done that with this new series. And that's one thing I can see why they didn't do it in the first Star Trek movie with Abrams. I kind of was hoping for it a little bit maybe in Star Trek Into Darkness, but we never got it. Instead, they went with Khan, which, okay.
I'm okay with, Khan's a great villain, but it's like, dude, seriously.
But see, I've always been wanting to see them deal with Kirk battling the Klingons, because to me, that's what makes the original series and the original films so iconic. Klingons were the bad guys of that era and that franchise, and just like the Borg is with Next Generation, I want to see them battling Klingons, and so far they've seemed to go completely out of their way to avoid that at this point.
Well,
I mean, we got a little bit of the Klingons into Darkness, but that was it. And I really like to see a good Kirk battling the Klingons. That's what I want to see in this new franchise.
Well, and I mean, like the big thing about the Klingons is, and they really did a good job in Next Generation with Worf. The thing about the Klingons was it was always supposed to be like
the Cold War
symbol of the Cold War. Like they're the Soviets.
Right. And well, see, they could do the Klingons more like kind of update them a little bit and make them more like a little bit of a terrorist at that time.
Well, Russia's a big thing now.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I'd hate to pick on Abrams. He's
No.
really good at what he does.
And I'm not
He's
picking
really
on
good at
Abrams.
what he does, but I think this is why after the first, he should have really only done one Star Trek movie.
Should have gotten someone else to do Into Darkness.
And see, that's the thing. Like Abrams, like if you ever watch Lost, that show is dumb as hell and pretends to be smart.
But yet
It's-
somehow
that's
it's somehow
always
popularity on TV for some reason. And I've seen more episodes of that than I really wanted to in the first place, just because of what I do for a living. I've never found the appeal to that.
See, that's
show,
kind
though.
of the problem with Abrams, though. Is Star Trek's big appeal is it's always tried to be much smarter show than everything else. I mean, it's I love Star Wars. I'm more of a Star Wars guy than I am a Star Trek guy. But let's be honest, Star Trek is a lot smarter than Star Wars.
Right.
On every level. They really needed somebody, after they did the first one, the first one was fine, but after that, they really needed, I'm not
Fresh
saying
eyes.
make a boring ass movie, but they really needed somebody to take the franchise back a little bit. Not necessarily even slow it down, but just bring in the social
the issues,
commentary.
yeah.
I mean, you look at Marvel movies, not all of them do, but some of them do. And the same year that this came out, you had Iron Man 3. Whether you like that movie or not, Iron Man 3 is so full of social allegories that it's crazy. And now, of course, you've got Civil War, which is even better. I mean, they're able to use these as metaphors and allegories, and you really didn't see that in Star Trek Into Darkness.
Chris Pine was recently asked in an interview about whether or not he felt Star Trek needed to kind of go back to, the whole, like you were just talking, the whole social issues and kind of slow things down, because since the first two movies all seem to be so action-oriented, and he kind of said, he kind of feels with today's movie audience that to slow Star Trek down, yes, more of the social commentary may be needed, but he still feels that these movies nowadays need more of the action than what they used to have in order for the audience to be pulled in and to them to remain considered popular in a certain sense, which I've argued in the past before that if you were to make Star Trek Voyage Home, Voyage Home would not work in today's society.
That wouldn't.
The older type Star Trek movies, you got good part of them would not work in today's audience, and if you'd have made a slower pace for the first Abrams movie, may have bombed, and we wouldn't even be talking about a third Star Trek movie in the new universe.
I'm not necessarily saying they need to slow the pace down, but I mean, when
bring
you
back
when you
in a
look
little
at
bit of the social commentary and what made Star Trek Star Trek.
when you look at Civil War, I mean, that is a movie that it's a big action movie, but it's a movie where, when you really think about it, it's it's a very smart movie. You see the posters, it's which side are you going to be on? And then you see the movie, it's well, they're both kind of right, and actually, but they don't jam it down your face as to which one is supposed to be right. I
They're
mean,
leaving it to the audience
really
to make your
well
decision.
written, and and it's Star Trek could do that. Definitely keep the action in, but they could do that. Civil War, action wise, compared to some of the other movies in the series, is the action in that movie is toned down quite a bit compared to a lot of other movies in the Marvel series.
Right.
So.
Then at number 3, I have what's probably considered the best of the Next Generation movies, First Contact, which is very well done. Now, my biggest problem I had with all the Generation movies, and you see this happen, brought up less
it's
and less.
It's really the only good one, but go on. Yeah.
As in Generations, Data put in Lore's emotion chip, which gave him the emotions. In First Contact, if you remember in Generations, they had it where it couldn't be deactivated or taken out because it had fused with his neural net. Okay, big deal. But then in First Contact, you have them walking through Enterprise E, and Data's talking to Picard, I feel, anxiety, da-da-da. And Picard tells Data, why don't you turn off your emotion chip? You hear this little, done, and they put Data. It's like they realized they made a mistake with doing that with Data in Generations, and then by the time you even get to Nemesis, his emotion chip's not even brought up.
Yeah.
So it's like they realized, ooh.
That's really funny.
They went somewhere where they shouldn't have, and then they kind of, every movie, they just kind of,
That's
less
really
and less,
well.
less and less.
It's really funny, actually. Well, it's sort of like Star Wars and Jar Jar Binks. It's by
the time you got to Revenge of the Sith, you see Jar Jar in one scene at the end, and that's it.
Except, when we release Return of the Jedi on DVD,
you hear the
let's let him scream at the end
when they show Naboo real quick. Yeah,
First Contact, by the way, I'd never seen it until you let me borrow it on DVD.
Really?
Years
ago. Of course,
back
you
in
also
2011.
I let you borrow some of my seasons of Next Generation there for a while.
Yeah,
I think I gave you recommendations of which shows to kind of start with, and then go
Most
from there.
Most of them were Borg episodes.
Borg and Klingon.
Yeah, I didn't even know what a Borg was until I was like, "What the hell's a Borg?"
Yeah. Then I
have, of course.
Yeah, and then the last two are probably pretty obvious. I have number 2 at Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home. You know, to me,
that is just such a romp movie. You know, like it's that one. You're right. Like that one wouldn't. I don't think. Well, maybe it could. It depends on how well if it's written well. Yeah.
Right. The funniest part of Voyage Home that I really like and enjoy, and I still get a chuckle out of it every time I see it, even though I know pretty much line for line. They're on the Klingon ship. They've left Vulcan, and McCoy sits down with Spock, want to talk about the differences in life, you know, like life, death, life. And Spock turns to McCoy and says, "I'm sorry, Doctor, I can't really discuss the subject without a common frame of reference." And McCoy says, "You mean I have to die in order for you to talk about death?" Spock goes, "Excuse me, Doctor, I'm getting a number of distress calls." And McCoy goes, "I don't doubt it." You know, it was humor subtly placed, but it wasn't jammed down your throat like it is in some of the other movies where they try too hard with the humor, and like in Star Trek V. Yeah, and then Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan probably will always and forever be known as probably the best Star Trek movie out there. Unless
why they sort of remade it.
unless some other movie down the road, Star Trek 22 ends up being better or whatever the case may be. I do have a list from an online site, screencrush.com, and I'm only using them because this is the one I happened to find. And they had their rankings of movies in order of what they thought was...
See, already I agree more with yours than theirs.
So they had... and I'm not picking on Screen Crush. It was the one I happened to find, the first one I came across, and I wasn't, because I'm sure I could probably come across about 7 different sites, all with 7 different opinions. But they had Star Trek Nemesis at number 12. Okay, maybe, but I think Star Trek 5 is a lot worse than Nemesis, so I disagree with that. Then they have Star Trek Insurrection. I'm sorry, no. Then Star Trek V: The Final Frontier at number 10. Is
that too high up?
Yeah.
Yeah,
about 2 spots too high up.
I would.
Then they have Star Trek Generations. Now, they actually have Star Trek Generations at the same one I do.
Oh, wow.
So that's actually the first one that actually even matches what I have. Then they have Star Trek The Motion Picture at number 8. Okay, it may be good as far as an episode on TV for the original series in the 60s, but as far as the movies, no.
It's a pretty bad movie.
No, I can't even stay awake to get through the motion picture.
Yeah.
If I want to watch the motion picture, I've got to do it an hour, turn it off, come back next day, watch the last hour. Because I can't...
3 hours long and nothing happens in it.
No
it's
shit.
So boring.
And then they've got Star Trek... See, this is where I really disagree. They have First Contact at number 7.
Yeah.
And it's like, no way. You're putting the best Star Trek Generations movie in at number 7.
I guess I don't like the Next Generation.
First Contact deserves at least top 5 in my book. Then they have Star Trek 6: The Undiscovered Country. I almost have a little argument with that one as well. Then they have Star Trek Into Darkness, which they have at one spot higher than what I do.
I wouldn't do that as a top 5. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not a hater of that movie by any means, but it's like, come on.
Then they have Star Trek 4: The Voyage Home at number 4.
Ooh, wow. 4.
No, okay. Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock at number 3.
Yeah.
No. It may be the best of the odd movies,
but it's not great.
But it's not top 3 material.
No. And then it's not even top 5 material.
And then they have Star Trek: The First Abrams movie at number 2.
No, sorry.
Voyage Home or Undiscovered Country or even First Contact deserve I would be almost happy with one of those.
I really like Star Trek. I owe that movie for getting me into the rest of the series. But you also got to know, it's a pretty dumb action movie. Which is fine, but it's definitely top 5 material, but not number 2. Like, there are better movies than that.
And then they have Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan at number 1. So basically, out of my list compared to theirs, they've got like 3 movies the same as I have ranked.
You know what? You said, I'm not going to pick on Screen Crush. Screw them. We're going to pick on them.
But anyway, I don't agree with 3/4 of their list as far as the order they have them in. And
what are they? Was this like fan poll, or was it just...
No, that's just whoever wrote the article for Screen Crush. That's their opinion.
Oh, God.
I don't agree with that.
Jesus Christ.
I don't agree with that. But everyone's got their opinion on Star Trek. Star Trek, especially with... now, whether or not you agree with the Abrams universe movies or the Kelvin timeline movies, however it is you want to look at it.
The Kelvin timeline. I kind of like that.
However you want to look at least the first 2 Abrams movies, whether you hate them, like them.
Oh, I like them.
Find them okay. One thing those first 2 movies have done, it put Star Trek back into the discussion because you have the hardcore Trekkies out there saying basically those 2 movies are blasphemy. Then you got the other people who kind of middle of the road, like, oh, hey, they're not bad, they're okay, whatever. I think what those 2 movies have done so far is it brought in even a group of people who may not have seen Star Trek or even considered going to see a Star Trek movie.
Yeah, and I'm one of those. Definitely.
Those first two movies, Star Trek and Into Darkness, are to the point you don't have to know anything of previous shows. You don't have to know anything about the original cast or timeline or crew. You don't have to know anything of the previous movies to understand it.
Yeah.
It's a fresh start. They don't shove a lot of Star Trek terms and whatever down your throat. You can go in and see either one of them pretty much separately and understand them easily and quickly. They're kind of more of a mainstream to draw in more of an audience. And if you want Star Trek to succeed in the theaters, you've almost had to do that.
You know, people get mad about stuff like that whenever something goes mainstream or sells out. And, you know, I get it. It's annoying to deal with new fans who don't respect anything. But, you know, for people like me, Star Trek in 2009, and then when I was a kid in like 97, like Final Fantasy VII for the video games was the same way. And then like Pink Floyd's
Off the Wall.
Dark Side of the Moon. No, not Off the Wall. You're thinking of Michael Jackson.
Oh.
But they did The Wall.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, stuff like that, stuff that comes off as
forgive me,
kind of
pop and rock is not my music forte.
You're okay. But like stuff like that, you know, the hardcore fans might scoff at that. But first off, you're probably like me. You probably joined the bandwagon with the same thing that I did.
Next generation.
Well, no. I don't mean you personally. I'm talking about like a lot of these people. I'm just saying stuff like this in general. A lot of times when there's something that sells out, it's annoying with the new fans that never want to respect where it came from. But for people like me, and there's a lot of people like me, when you get caught into something like that, and Star Trek is like the big example, I've become a huge fan. Like I've watched all the original shows. I've watched some of the cartoons. I've watched most of Next Generation. I've seen all the movies now except Insurrection. I would consider myself a Star Trek fan now, and I owe it to that movie. I guess what I'm saying is sports fans do that too.
Right.
Sports fan, like whenever a new fan comes in, they get mad.
Uh-huh.
But
Or you know, they jump on the bandwagon, yeah.
And there's bandwagon stuff, but a lot of these bandwagon people end up staying on for life and end up being probably a bigger fan than you might be. You know?
See,
I mean, and also like, who cares if it's bandwagon?
And I've told you this before, and I think I may even said something about it on my podcast before. The hardcore Trekkies who don't like the new movies, they were like, okay, the first one was okay, it was all right, it could have been better. They gave it a pass in their book. Mm-hmm. Okay, for first attempt, they took it. Into Darkness, they hated it because they felt it was a ripoff of Wrath of Khan. They didn't improve anything. They bashed on it, and I was like, okay, well, if you didn't really care, and there were some out there who didn't even like the 2009 version of Star Trek that Abrams did.
Yeah, there were lots.
And yet you hear them complain that they still went to see Into Darkness hoping things would change. Yeah. It's like, well, if you didn't like the first one, why did you go see the second one?
Well, here's the other
and here's the thing is there's some people out there who didn't like both, but yet they're hoping Beyond was they're going to go to see Beyond and still have the same complaints. Well, then why did you go back and see the third one?
Well, here's the other thing. I mean, there's going to be a new show.
And see, that show's getting complaints already because CBS is only going to air the premiere of it on CBS itself, and then all the other shows are going to be streaming on their CBS Access online.
Really?
That's it.
Do you have to pay for that?
But Access is like $5.99 a month.
Yeah, that is kind of lame.
But see, I think in a certain sense, whether you like that idea or don't like that idea, I think for Star Trek, I think that's what needs to happen right now. Because to put Star Trek on CBS and say, okay, we're going to give it a 13-episode run on CBS, A, they're going to have a lot less budget. B, if it doesn't do well in the first 1 to 2, 3 episodes, all of a sudden it could be killed before they even get the full 13 episodes completed. So I think putting it online and doing it that way.
I'm okay with online, but making it CBS Access is kind of it's one that nobody has. It's like,
well, I think
you should put it on. They should it would have been better if they put it on Hulu or something.
Well, I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to draw people into CBS Access, and they want to make it their kind of flagship type of thing to get people to come to.
Is, like, at first it was kind of nice to pay for these. It's like, oh, it's like the a la carte thing, but now it's like you're seriously now we have to pay for CBS too, and we are literally going to have to pay for everything now instead of and then before you know it, there's going to be like the streaming service, which is going to be like cable, and it's going to be like you can get all of these for $100 a month.
No one's going to be completely happy, and I've had arguments before online with the hardcore Trekkies that just hate this new stuff. You know, if you're really that upset with the new stuff,
watch the old ones.
If you've got the DVDs, you can watch those DVDs to your heart's content and stop complaining and trying to ruin everyone else who may like these new movies. Because if people who come in who have never really paid attention to Star Trek before come in and like these new movies, and it gets their curiosity to want to go back and maybe watch maybe the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine or Voyager or even the original series or even the earlier movies.
It's not like these shows were ever perfect.
Yeah, right. I mean, never perfect. But if people are drawn in by the newer movies and it gets them to watch the older stuff and they say, hey, I kind of like this, so be it.
Yeah.
Who cares?
It also keeps the older stuff immortalized a little while longer.
Right.
It's like, oh, yeah, okay, now we got this new generation that like this, like me. Now these guys are watching the older stuff too, and it keeps that going along older, which is good because, you know, when you go back to the really old stuff like Lone Ranger, like all those really old Westerns, the Lone Ranger's almost forgotten.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and Gene Autry and all those, their museums are shutting down, and it's okay to reinvent this stuff to keep those memories alive.
You know, Star Trek, and I think this is what some things that the hardcore fans forget. Star Trek, in order to survive, well, it is a show, but
that's a really douchey thing to say, but yeah.
But in order for Star Trek to be continued to put out there, whether it's television or movies, it's going to have to evolve and make some changes to adapt to the times, adapt to the audience you're trying. You can't just make movies and have them directed strictly at the hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Because if that's the case, you're going to get one movie about every 10 years, and that's going to be it.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get another show. And if you really look back at the other stuff before the 2009 Star Trek, from Star Trek, the original series, all the way up through basically Star Trek Nemesis, it's basically one big 40-year timeline with a lot of history. And sometimes, even in Voyager, you can get stuff referencing, making comments about something else that they're making a slight reference back to the original series. And unless you know that, you have no clue what the hell they're talking about.
Yeah.
You've almost had to start the slate clean and start over again and to get the new audience to come in to enjoy Star Trek.
Yeah, and that's okay.
And that's fine.
Like the DC Comics have done that like 3 different times.
Right.
This last time it didn't turn out as well as they wanted, but that's okay. They can do it again later.
I think Star Trek can be around for another 50 years. People are going to have to be willing to accept some change, and it may not be what grandparents grew up with, but so be it.
Yeah. I mean as long as we're not assimilated by a Borg-like species.
Right. We're cool. Unless it's 7 to 9 from Voyager. Jerry Ryan.
I remember. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Any last thoughts or comments on Star Trek or anything else out there? I mean, there's been a lot of movie stuff going on this summer. I mean, anything at all?
I don't know. I feel like I covered everything. I don't know about you.
This podcast may get posted before or slightly after Star Trek Beyond comes out. I know I will definitely go see Beyond. Beyond.
Same here.
I look forward to it, and obviously, it's going to be the last time you see Anton Yelchin as Chekhov.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how they move forward with that. We've discussed that on my last podcast. We talked pretty in depth about his career. You can catch that as well. I think that pretty much does it. Hopefully, if you're a Star Trek fan, whether you agree or disagree with our opinions, so be it. Everyone's got their own opinions. You can always catch my podcast on YouTube or my website, reggiestake.com, Facebook page. Follow me on Twitter at reggiestake. You can find James's stuff. There's links on my website to his stuff on his Facebook and YouTube page. He's got a lot of good podcasts about some other comics and stuff. There's one in particular with George Lawson that's really good. It's from a couple years back. Go listen to that. So if you're into comics, by all means, go check out James's True Believers. Some really good stuff on there. I'm going to end this podcast in probably maybe a cheesy way, but I really don't care.
There you go.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before. Live long and prosper.